Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you to my History Reaction channel. Today we'll be taking a look at the French Revolution by Oversimplified. This will be part 1 of 2. We will be watching this part this week. Next week on Saturday, our Oversimplified Saturdays, we'll be watching part 2. And I'm starting out with these for my first 2 Oversimplified Saturdays, because we're getting ready to, we'll also be going into French Fridays, where we will be tackling a whole long series on Napoleon. So I thought we would look at the French Revolution, parts 1 and 2, and then we'd look at Oversimplified Napoleon. So with that said, as always, I will include a link to the original content in the description down below. I highly encourage people to head over there and show Oversimplified some love and support if you are not already subscribed to them, if you haven't already liked all their videos, and if you're one of those 2 or 3 people that haven't. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and get into this. I am really nervous about this whole Napoleon thing because French history, I really don't know a whole lot. And I will contribute what I can. I do know some things. I've had classes that covered some of the basics, but I'm not really good on in-depth knowledge of French history in general, or even the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon's just never been one of those characters that's really drawn my interest that much. Maybe it's just because he's too well-known, too prominent, and everybody looks into him. I tend to prefer looking into lesser known individuals. So, but I do know some stuff, so I'm not terrified of tackling this topic. But I expect I'll be learning a lot more than I can actually share myself. But I will do the best I can.
This video was made possible by NordVPN. Get protected by clicking the link below and get an amazing 75% off. That's only $2.99 per month with an additional month free for a limited time. Also, new French Revolution merch available now in the store, including King Louis and Marie Antoinette character pins, complete with detachable heads, just like the real thing.
Ow.
So I said to the Marquis de la Fufayette, "What do you think I am? Some dirty peasant? I've never worked a day in my life." Wow, that Marie Antoinette sure is pretty. Sure is. Wouldn't want to be Prince Louis though. That's going to be a lot of responsibility when he becomes king, especially since France is in financial ruin.
France wasn't in financial ruin at this time. They were in debt. I mean, they were having a crisis, yes. I think saying they're in ruin is probably a little bit of an exaggeration, however.
Quite. Thank you one and all for attending the royal marriage of my grandson, the future King of France, to the Archduchess of Austria. Now for the very awkward yet historically accurate part of the ceremony, where we all watch them get into bed together.
This was a tradition in many parts of Europe during this period. I don't know specifically how it was done in France or whether it actually happened here, but things like this were a thing. No, thank you.
All right, now that's out of the way, let's leave the royal couple to it. You better give us an heir, you fat, ill-bred boy. Nighty-night.
No pressure.
A lot of responsibility. France is in financial ruin. You fat, ill-bred boy. Quite. That's going to be a lot of responsibility. France is in financial ruin. That's going to be... Oh, great. He's a freaking weirdo.
Sounds about right.
France, the most prosperous, cultured, and beautiful nation in the world, as it had been for centuries. An exquisite social culture, with the king and the upper classes throwing crazy parties every night, enjoying high living and fine dining. Who cares that they were only able to do so off the backs of the hard-working, starving poor? What are they gonna do? Revolt? They're only 80% of the population. No. Life in France is great. What's that, friend?
If you see some similarities to the video on the Russian Revolution, that's because there are a lot. In fact, when I did the Russian Revolution, I read a quote from an American who is in Moscow right before the revolution breaks out, who wrote in his diary that the conditions in Russia reminded him of the conditions in France that led up to the French Revolution. He draws direct parallels to what's happening in Russia at that time. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities in the general state of what's going on. In both cases, you've got a country that is impoverished. A lot of people are feeling oppressed. You're going to have, in both cases, food shortages, severe food shortages. You're going to have bread riots breaking out in both countries, and the nobility is going to be perceived as above all this. They don't care. They've got everything they need. Why would they care about us down here? Type of an attitude. They'll be seen as living an excessive, exorbitant lifestyle while everybody else around them starving to death. And that's not going to go over well.
France, you want to go to war with Britain and increase your power? Go for it, little buddy. You do you. And you lost. Now
Yes.
you're in severe financial debt. We have no money. What do? Should we stop partying? Heck no. Party harder. That's okay. The peasantry will pick up the slack. They were created by God to do all the work, and you were created to reap all the benefits and party hard. That's just how society works, and we've all just accepted it for centuries.
Okay, so this is the social hierarchy of France. You got the three estates. First estate is clergy, second estate is the nobility, and then you have the third estate, which is the peasantry, which is basically everybody else that's not a member of the clergy or a noble. And that is relative, or not relative, but relevant to the discussion that's coming.
Why? Why what? Why do the nobility get to be all rich and stuff? Just because they were born into it? And the rest of us schmucks just have to accept that? Hell, why
Yep.
do we even need a king? Who decided that? It all just seems very unfair and unequal, and I, for one, am starting to question it. Wow, that's very enlightened of you. And so began the Age of Enlightenment. Great philosophical thinkers across France and beyond began to question whether this beautiful nation was really all that beautiful after all. Hey, Prince Louis, bad news. Your grandpa died of smallpox this morning, which means good news, you're now the king. So just to sum up, France is in severe financial debt, and the angry populace are beginning to question how necessary you are. But hey, I believe in you, champ. You got this, maybe. Oh no! Prince Louis Capet became King Louis XVI in May 1774. He was a notoriously weak man, and he knew it. He barely had the wisdom to rule a nation, never mind one in crisis, and he was easily manipulated by those around him. One of his first acts was to try to get revenge on the British by financing their American colony's revolution. Hey, we're an independent nation now. That was real swell of you, Louis. Couldn't have done it without you. Glad I could help. So hey, about all that money we lent you, when can we get that back? Yep, you're a great guy. I'll never forget what you've done for us. Real glad I could help, friend, but about that money, gotta go now, chum. Best of luck to you. Oh no! And now
That's not accurate, actually. So the U.S. does repay its debts to France over time. I think they actually paid it off pretty quickly. Alexander Hamilton sets all that up, and he's in charge of making sure that happens. And he does get it paid off pretty quickly. So that part of it's not really accurate. But you got to remember, France was already severely in debt before helping the United States. So getting some of that money back, I mean, it's appreciated, but it's not going to make a big difference if you're already starting way down here. Then you go down and now you're back up to where you were before, which is already still severe economic crisis.
now France was in even more debt. France's poor, suffering under the strain of economic ruin, watched as the nobility continued to live as though nothing was wrong. In particular, they grew increasingly disdainful of the Queen, Marie Antoinette, as she continued to spend all of France's money on her own luxurious lifestyle and fashion. While the peasants were breaking their backs in the fields, she was walking around like, hey, my hair is about. I'm not making that up. Her hair really was about. And her lavish spending earned her the nickname Madame Deficit. And speaking of the Queen, there was also
We're going to stop right there because that's all somewhat true. The whole hair in a boat shape thing is questionable. There were styles like that at this time, but as far as I know, there's no definite proof that Marie Antoinette herself wore that particular style. But it's certainly possible. The bizarre hairstyles was in vogue at the time, and there are documented accounts of people wearing that kind of a style. But I'm not aware, and I could be wrong on this. There's a lot out there I don't know. But to my understanding, there's no documented source that she herself wore that particular style, although it's certainly not out of question. And she probably did follow that fashion trend. If not that, it would have been something else just as outrageously over the top. But the whole Madame Deficit thing was anti-royalty propaganda. The amount that Marie Antoinette was spending was not as much as people as this video to kind of makes you think it would have been, comparatively speaking. I mean, compared to the starving peasants, yes, but in terms of the budget that she was working under, it was pretty reasonable. She was not as over the top. The whole Madam Deficit thing is something that the enemies of the monarchy came up with as part of anti-monarchy propaganda. They exaggerated how much he was spending. They made it sound much worse than it actually was. Which isn't to say that it's still a bad look if you're spending tons of money on frivolities while your people are starving. But this idea that she spent ludicrous amount is a gross exaggeration. She spent an amount that you would expect any queen or princess to spend at this time period. It was nothing, it was definitely exaggerated.
A long-standing scandal around the fact that the king took a very long time to boink her, and the working classes of Paris began ridiculing the royal couple with lewd pamphlets depicting the queen as a court thought, and the king as a wuss, unable to fulfill his marital duty. Respect for the monarchy was at an all-time low, as France's finances were spiraling out of control, and the king and his aides really only had one solution to the crisis. Tax the poor. Tax the poor. We could do a sexy calendar shoot. I mean, tax the poor. And so it was. The poor, who were already struggling to make ends meet, found themselves being taxed from every direction. Hey, I'm the royal tax collector. Looks like you've yet to pay your income tax, head tax. By the way, how many windows you got in that house of yours? 3? Oof, yep. There's gonna be a tax for that. Hey, your local priest here. Have you paid your church tithe yet? Well, at least this one is going to the good work of God. Or God. I think this year, God wants me to buy a new swimming pool. Hey, private tax collector here. Oh, and I brought some goons with me. Just a few quick questions. How much salt did you buy this year? About 7 kilos, I think? Yep. Okay, there's gonna be a tax for that.
Right.
Oh, what's that over there?
The salt tax was a real thing, and you were expected to purchase a minimum amount per year. There was a quota on how much you had to purchase, so you couldn't really deflate the amount. Basically, there was a minimum amount that you had to claim regardless.
It's extra salt I held over from last year, so I wouldn't have to buy as much this year. Oh, yeah, there's a tax for that. And what are you doing with all this salt? Well, obviously cooking, on the table, yep, and preserving fish and meat.
Yes.
Oh no. Yep, and there's a tax for that. Hey, how old is he? He's 9. And so he's purchased his required amount of salt for this year, right?
Yeah.
What? No, he's 9. Uh-oh. Sorry, little Timmy. Looks like I'm gonna have to tax you for that.
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. There was a head tax. You had a minimum amount you had to buy for each head in the family, so to speak. Yeah, and salt, like they said, it's not just for cooking. That's more of a modern thing. Back in this period, it was the method of preserving food because you don't have refrigeration. So you pack things in salt, either directly or you'd put them in, you'd have a brine, salt water, you'd pack in brine. When you get things like salt pork, but you can also get things like corned beef or pastrami. All of these that we still have now are meats that were preserved in salts. That's what makes a corned beef. That's what makes pastrami. Although in the case of pastrami, it's a brine, and the brine has other spices and so on in it. But salt is a very effective preservative. It draws water out of cells' walls, which disrupts the cells. It kills bacteria and things that would break down your food. It also makes the food very salty.
Yep, salty. There's going to be a tax for that. And that's not all. A huge portion of the peasants' harvest had to be given up. And there was also the labor tax, where peasants were required to work a certain number of days for their local lord without pay. Obviously, people weren't too happy with.
And that was pretty common for a long part of human history in many cultures. Labor taxes and ideas along that line where civilians had to spend a certain number of days a year or hours a year working for the local government in lieu of pay. It dates very, very far back. I'm pretty sure things like that, I know things like that were around as far back as the Egyptians.
These taxation policies, and the aggressive nature of these private tax farmers sometimes even escalated to violence. In particular, though, the people really hated how inconsistent the taxation rules were across the nation, and also the fact that the first two estates often had to pay very little, if any, tax at all. And so, the anger continued to grow. France had a population that was just about ready to explode. What could push them over the edge? How about a touch of natural disaster? A series of harsh summers and winters left the peasants' harvests in ruin, meaning they had no food or money, and the cost of bread skyrocketed. Of course, the upper classes had massive stocks of grain and wheat, so they were virtually untouched by this new crisis. But now the poor really were starving, and they began to riot.
That's one thing that I constantly harp on when we're talking about historic revolutions. If you look at a lot of revolutions in history, you're going to find a lot of bread riots leading up to the revolution. A lot of revolutions, if you look hard enough at the early period, down in the common people, not up into politics, which is where a lot of historians traditionally want to look. They want to look at the leading figures. If you're looking at the Russian Revolution, you're going to want to look at Lenin and the Bolsheviks. You're not going to, a lot of them tend to not want to look down at what's going on the street level. I don't want to say that they don't want to, but there's this tendency to be drawn to the great man historical perspective, or to the political or economic historical perspective, but not so much at just basic human need for survival, which is why I am so interested in things like famine and natural disasters and so on. Because whenever you see a period of natural disasters that lead to famine, you often see political unrest. A lot of these revolutions, and this is a good example of one, you see that leading into a greater revolution where you do get these great men and figureheads coming out and taking advantage of the situation to mold it in directions they want it to go. But when at the end of the day, people can put up with a lot from their politicians, whether it's a democracy, whether it's an autocracy, whatever it is. People are reluctant to make that big of a fuss. But when it comes down to survival, when it comes down to having food to eat, at that point, what else can you do? You're die or die. And someday I need to go over this in one of my videos, probably over on my original channel, but there was a study done right towards the end of World War II, the Minnesota starvation experiment, where they actually took healthy, fit young men and deliberately starved them to understand the psychological and the physical effect of starvation on healthy young men in preparation for liberating all these prisoners of war camps and dealing with people who had suffered from famine and hardship during World War II. So this experiment was done, and they didn't starve them literally to the point of serious suffering, but they dramatically reduced their caloric intake per day for a long period of time, and then recorded the psychological and physical effects. And there were some noticeable psychological changes in people over a fairly short period of time. The people participating in this experiment, these young men, were obviously more fatigued. I mean, that's a given. But they became apathetic. They stopped caring. They lost empathy for other people around them. They would start fantasizing about food. Food would become an obsession. And these guys were still being fed a survivable diet. So it's not like they were literally starving. But what they were being fed was the equivalent of normal peasant rations based on some estimates that were done by demographers for late medieval and early modern Europe and even other places as well. They have a pretty good idea what kind of a caloric intake they were getting. And these soldiers were getting a little bit above what some of these peasants under good circumstances were getting. But when circumstances are really bad like this, yeah, you're going to have some serious psychological meltdowns. If that experiment is any indication, you're going to get apathy. You're going to people just aren't going to care anymore about anything. They're going to lose empathy for their fellow people. They were more irritable, more prone to anger. They became increasingly obsessed with food. Like I said, they fantasized about food. And I've read a lot of diaries of the people in the siege of Leningrad, which was a severe starvation experience. And you see the same thing in those diary entries, where people were like, oh, my grandmother is going to die soon, and I hope she does it soon because that's one less mouth to feed, more for me. And these same people were talking about how much they loved these relatives earlier, but now it's like, I hope they will hurry up and die so I can have their food. That's what this kind of situation does to people. So it's really not surprising you have these uprisings. Bread riots are very common. You see them often in revolutionary periods prior to the main event, if you want to put it that way. They're kind of a sign that a revolution might be coming. You see it like in the Arab Springs. There were bread riots before that happened. There's bread riots in France before the main revolution takes off. Same thing in Russia. There's bread riots in villages across Russia before the official revolution breaks out in February of 1917. It's a symptom that things are getting out of hand. Anyway, enough about that. I could talk forever on starvation and its effects on people's psyches and their role in helping create the perfect environment for revolutions.
Women took to the streets, bakeries were raided, and bakers suspected of keeping bread for themselves were sometimes even hanged.
Yep.
Wow, this is really
not at all
control.
unexpected.
Your Majesty, we need some decisive action. You need to step up and lead us. What
Yes.
will you do? Okay, I've got this. I know. I'll summon the Estates General, and they'll decide what to do.
Yep.
You really are a fat, ill-bred boy. The Estates General was the closest thing France had to a government, apart from the king. It was a purely advisory body and was rarely summoned. In fact, it hadn't been summoned for 175 years prior to this. But with
Yeah, and Russia had something very similar to the Estates General. They had a body that they could summon when needed to advise the Tsar. And just like in France, it was used fairly frequently when it was first conceived, but over time, kings kind of tended to steer away from it until it became all but never used. There's a lot of parallels there between Russia and France, because you see the same thing in the 1905 Russian Revolution, where the boyars are not the boyars, but the Duma is brought back into play. The Duma was kind of the Russian version of the States General. It'd been around for a long time, the idea of it, where you'd have representatives from different groups gather to advise the Tsar in that case. But it had fallen more and more out of use over time until 1905. Russia had a revolution, and as part of the settlement, they're bringing that back on a more permanent basis, theoretically. Nicholas never really uses it. He kind of, once the crisis is over, just kind of ignores it. But yeah, this is not a uniquely France concept. It's a uniquely France construction of this concept, though. And it hasn't been called in 100 years or more. Yeah, that's absolutely accurate.
France in a severe crisis, the king felt the time was right to call on the government to help. The Estates General was made up of representatives from the three estates, that is, the clergy, the nobility,
Right.
and everybody else. Okay, thanks for coming, everyone. The first order of business is regarding the clergy and nobility. You all get brand new Porsches. You get a Porsche.
I don't think that's
and
right.
You get a Porsche. And you get a Porsche. Everybody gets a Porsche. And now into the second order of business. France is completely out of money. Like, it's never been this bad before. Anyone got any ideas? How about we all get Lamborghinis next time? The king decided that in order to make a decision, they had to come up with a voting system. Okay, the clergy. You have a population of 130,000, so you'll get one vote.
Yep.
The nobility. You have a population of 350,000, so you'll also get one vote. And the third estate. You have a population of 27 million people and make up 98% of the population. Very impressive. You'll get one vote.
Yeah, that's how it's kind of set up. Each of the three estates gets one vote, which basically means the first two estates are just going to always team up against the third, even though the third represents a vast majority of the population. You may have caught me saying when he said 98%. It probably wasn't quite that high, but it was up in that range. It was probably closer to 95 to 97%. You hear the number 98% tossed around a lot, but when I was doing some research on the famines and the food shortages in France at this time, as part of actually a research paper I was doing on the Russian famine leading into the Russian Revolution in February, I also had to look at France to do some comparison analysis. And I remember there reading an article that was talking that generally, we don't know for sure, but the third estate was estimated to be 95 to 97%, but it's very common to hear 98% just thrown out there. It probably wasn't quite that, but it was definitely way up there, so that's just nitpicking at that point.
Third Estate were obviously pretty unhappy with this system because they kept on finding that this would happen. We propose to raise taxes on the Third Estate. All in favor? All opposed? 2-1. Taxes will be raised on the Third Estate. We propose a motion that says the first two estates are a bunch of poo-poo heads. All in favor? All opposed? 2-1. It's official. We are not poo-poo heads. The Third Estate realized that any attempt at reform would be outvoted by the two upper estates, and they thought that was kind of lame. So they decided that since they were 98% of the population, they could go off to form their own government, make their own laws, and take over the running of the country. And so, the National Assembly was born. The Third Estate was now in control, and there was nothing the king could do to stop. Ha-ha! I've locked you all out of your building. What are you going to do about it? We'll probably go find a different building that isn't locked. Ow, no. The National Assembly did find another unlocked building just down the road, an indoor tennis court. Where on the 20th of June, 1789, they all took the tennis court oath, pledging to continue meeting until the king finally gave in to their demands for more equality and economic reform. This new National Assembly included many of the most educated members of the Third Estate, including two young lawyers by the names of Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton. Some members of the first two estates even joined their cause.
No. Danton, if we're talking about the Jacobin Club, at this point, Danton is not part of this. He comes in a little later, at least in terms of the Jacobin Club. He was part of a different organization. He was actually the president of, I don't remember the name of it. Let me look it up. I'll be right back in a moment. But yeah, he was, for the first couple of years of this, the Jacobin Club comes out, but for the first couple of years, Danton is in a different organization. Let me look that up real quick. I'll be right back. So yeah, at this time, Danton was a member of the Cordier Club, which was a similar club, but it was not the Jacobins. He's president of the Cordiers until 1790, which would be a year or two after this.
Some of these men formed a radical new political party called the Jacobin Club and quickly became leading figures, while many members of the Third Estate
did I just read what I thought it said?
Party called the Jacobin Club and quickly became leading figures.
Actually joined a bit later. So yeah, he corrected himself. And that is right. He had joined a little bit later.
While many members of the Third Estate simply wanted more equality, a growing number in this Jacobin
I love the graffiti up here. I love Robespierre. Tee-hee. It's rad to be radical. No girls allowed. Jacobins rule.
Faction would begin calling for something even crazier. The removal of the king entirely. And this is where fear began to take hold. With such a volatile situation developing, everyone was afraid of something. The king feared his position was under threat, and he called in the military to take position around Paris. The Third Estate heard rumor of the gathering military force, and they feared the king was planning to round them up and arrest them. Maybe he'd even execute them. It also didn't help that the king had just dismissed France's popular finance minister, who had been trying to make reforms himself. It seemed the king was done negotiating. Fear, left unchecked, often boils over into anger. Anger detonates with violence. The angry people of Paris, after centuries of cruel inequality, harsh oppression, even starvation, fearful of having their new movement for reform demolished so soon, decided that it was now or never to take action. Screw reform. They decided they'd do one better. How about revolution? The people of Paris, believing the French military was preparing to attack, decided they should arm themselves. The National Assembly announced the creation of a bourgeois militia, the National Guard, and immediately, many troops from the French military defected over to the revolutionary side. In the early hours of July 14th, 1789, a large crowd stormed and raided the Hôtel des Invalides, a military hospital where they were able to secure a large number of rifles. The bad news was they weren't able to find any gunpowder for their new weapons.
Right.
The good news was they knew exactly where to
Yep,
get some. A prison
the
fortress
Bastille.
and a symbol of royal tyranny towering over Paris, the Bastille. Mid-morning, the crowd gathered around the Bastille and demanded that the man in charge, Governor Delaunay, surrender the prison and hand over the gunpowder. Obviously, Governor Delaunay was like, no way. So he stalled for time by inviting a few members of the crowd in for negotiations. The crowd, still waiting outside, quickly became impatient, and before long, they stormed the fortress, taking on the French troops inside. Your Majesty, we've received word that the people have surrounded the Bastille. Governor Delaunay will hold them off. No need to worry. Actually, Your Majesty, it appears the crowd is now headed away from the Bastille. You see? What did I tell you? Clearly, Governor Delaunay has defeated them and has them on the run. No need to worry. Your Majesty? Isn't
Yeah.
that Governor Delaunay's head on a pike? Well, clearly, Governor Delaunay has taken on the form of a bodiless pike-head deity, and the people are so enamored with him, they're parading him around the city. No need to worry at all. When the National Assembly heard about the violence that had taken place, they had two options. Either one, they denounce it and try to carry on the revolution using peaceful means, or two, they say, damn, you stuck his head on a pike? That's pretty hardcore. And we love it. Incidentally, they went with option number.
That's an exaggeration for comedic effect. When this happens, there's mixed feelings in the assembly. Most of them accept it. It's not kind of what they wanted to happen, but it's done. It's over with. We'll just work with what we have. But there were certainly some who were excited about it, and there were some who were horrified by it, but the general reaction was just, okay, well, that happened, and now what? We need to come up with how we handle this.
2. Some historians believe this reaction paved the way for the utter violence and bloodshed that would become the legacy of the French Revolution. This widespread acceptance of violence during the Revolution is also largely credited to the writings of a certain
Yes.
Jean-Paul Marat, a man of science with a horrible skin condition that kept him confined to a bathtub. He
Yep.
began writing a radical newspaper he affectionately named The Friend of the People. Citizens of France, be very afraid. Given the chance, the king and the nobility won't hesitate to massacre us all. The solution is simple. Execute them. Kill every last one of them. Cut off 1,000 heads, and if that's not enough, cut off 1,000 more. Oh, hey, Mr. Squeaky, what are you doing down there?
I don't know that he ever said that quite that directly, but that's pretty much captures the spirit of his attitude in these pamphlets.
You're so cute. Aw, I love you too, Mr. Squeaky. Mwah. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, kill them all. It
Yeah.
became one of the most popular publications in Paris during the Revolution and succeeded in spreading ever-increasing fear and anger among the people. In August, leaders of the National Assembly, with help from a certain Thomas Jefferson, adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, an incredible document that guaranteed liberty and equal rights to all men.
Yeah, so Jefferson did work with Lafayette to draft that document. It was primarily a French document. Jefferson was just there as an advisor, making some suggestions on what you need to, how you want to present it, how you want to say this, what kind of ideas you want to make sure are included. So he was an advisor, though he wasn't the writer of it.
When I say men, I mean men.
Oh, yeah.
Despite its glaring shortcomings in gender equality, the massively influential declaration would go on to inspire the struggle for liberty and equality across the planet for centuries. However, back in France, the vast majority of the people weren't really.
Yeah, there was actually a direct response to that. And I don't remember the name of the woman that wrote it, but a woman wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women in response to the Declaration of the Rights of Men.
So concerned with enlightened ideas of equality as much as they were concerned with the fact that they were still starving.
Yes.
Bread was still expensive as hell and hard to come by. The people felt that one reason nothing had been done yet about the crisis was because the king simply couldn't see the problem. He lived in Versailles, a full 20 kilometers southwest of Paris, and as a result, lived in comfort, separated from his dirty, stinking subjects. On October 5th, a crowd of women, 7,000 strong, decided they'd do something unprecedented. They decided they'd remove that separation and confront the king directly. The woman marched all the way to the king's palace.
You ever notice that a lot of these revolutions start with a woman's march? It's happening here. It happened in the February Revolution as well.
In Versailles. Along the way, the crowd continued to grow into the tens of thousands, and when they arrived, they demanded an audience with the king. What are those things outside the palace? They're poor people, Your Majesty. That's poor people? They say they're hungry. Hungry? Then let them eat cake. Wow.
Oh.
See, this is the exact BS that led to this whole mess in the first place. You're so out of touch. They're writhing around in the filth, breaking their back to barely scrape by, and they come to you demanding just the basic ability to feed themselves, and you think a slice of cake will sort them out? Well, then let them eat Taco Bell Crunchwrap Supreme.
That'll take care of it.
They're not that desperate. Members of the crowd actually managed to break into the palace.
Okay, so let them eat cake. That was never actually said by Marie Antoinette. We're really pretty sure about that. The saying itself was let them eat brioche, and it dates to about 20 years. It was on record of a princess saying, then let them eat cake, or then let them eat brioche, a couple of decades before this happened. So it was already an established response from a noblewoman, a princess specifically, to peasants demanding food. So it's almost certainly was just something where they took that literary, it was written by Rousseau, actually, about 20 years before this. Marie Antoinette would have been around 9 at that time. And it was just, they just lifted it from Rousseau's writing and attributed it to Marie Antoinette. She almost certainly had never said that.
With the intention of killing the queen, who narrowly escaped through a secret passage in her bedroom. The enraged mob killed several members of the royal guard and raised their heads on pikes, which, if you haven't noticed yet, is something they were quite fond of doing. The king had no choice but to come out and talk to the crowd. He agreed to accept his new position.
When they say, if you haven't noticed, it's something they were kind of fond of doing, again, I take a little exception to that. There were fatalities, but we really don't know the mindset of these people and just how, well, what their actual intentions were in this particular incident, how determined they were just to murder and execute as opposed to just trying to get their problems dealt with. So given what actually happened, it's easy to make that assumption, but we're kind of putting ideas in their head that aren't really supported by any concrete documented facts, at least with this particular incident. We just don't know how much murder was specifically on the mind of these people and how much of it was just, we want our problem solved and you guys are the one that can solve it. We're here to make sure you do it, type of a thing, if that makes any sense.
Sharing power with the revolutionary government and to return to Paris with the crowd, removing the separation between king and subject. King Louis had a problem with people constantly raiding his palace, but one thing he didn't have a problem with was people raiding his computer, because he used...
We're going to skip this because this is an older video, and it looks like that was the end of the video anyway. So that's part 1 of the French Revolution. We'll be back in a week for Oversimplified Saturday again with part 2 of the French Revolution, and then we will go straight into the Napoleonic Wars Oversimplified for Oversimplified Saturdays, and starting, not this coming, well, this video released, it's already past it. So this next Friday, we will start French Fridays, and we will start diving into the history of Napoleon from epic history. And we'll just start with in chronological order and go through them all. I don't know if we're going to do the marshals or not. They've got a separate series on Napoleon's marshals. I'm not planning to do them, at least not right away, anytime in the near future. If people want to see them, we'll put them on the list for further down the road. It's going to take us long enough just to get through Napoleon himself. It's going to take better part of well over half a year if we're just doing one episode a week. And I don't want to burn everybody out on Napoleon by just continuing it forever. So at some point we're going to have to stop. If we get to that stage and people want to see the marshals, then sure, we'll tackle them. I don't think I'll be able to contribute anything at all on those. So I don't know how good a reaction it's going to be, but we'll discuss that when we get there. Anyway, thank you for joining me. I hope I was able to add at least a little bit to this, and I will see you all back for part 2. Thank you again. Bye-bye.